Well, greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison. I serve as the president of 1615, where I also serve as a church missions coach. And it is a real pleasure to serve the body of Christ in this special way in this unique time. So before we get into today's webinar and I introduce our presenter, I want to let you know about another webinar that's right around the corner. It's called Keeping the Missions Flame Burning During a Pandemic. God, Germs, and Global Missions, Part 2. We did Part 1 2 weeks ago. In fact, you can access Part 1 on our website, 1615.org, if you would like to watch that or listen to that. It was excellent, and there was such a high demand, we decided to do Part 2. Joining us will be David Johannes and John Hurst. They were the presenters in the first one, and I think it's going to be very encouraging and very practical. What we want to talk about are what are the types of things churches can be doing right now to fan that missions flame. Prayer, education, things of that nature. Having a strong global focus is difficult when there's not a crisis. So we need to be more intentional today to really build that missions heart and fan that flame. So you can register for this webinar at 1615.org. Now, today's webinar is a timely one, certainly. It is entitled Caring for Missionaries in a Pandemic, Biblical and Practical Insights. And just like keeping the missions flame burning when things are going well requires a great deal of intentionality, caring for missionaries when things are well requires inspiration and intentionality, and to get your people to think about geographically distant people and people groups and missionaries, again, is tough in the best of circumstances. So especially so right now. And we're going to be talking about how do you care for missionaries in a manner worthy of God's name during a pandemic. So today's guest is a personal friend of mine. In fact, Jeff, I think we've been swinging swords together for over 20 years. Is that about right?
I think it's, yeah, probably right at 20 years or maybe a year or two more than that.
Yeah, what a gift, Jeff. I think some of the best friendships this side of heaven come when we join forces in God's purpose. So it is a pleasure to call you a friend. And as I was thinking about this topic, I could think of no one better. You just have such an incredible understanding of missionary care and a passion for it. So I know our viewing audience is going to be blessed today. So before I turn over the controls to Jeff and allow him to begin sharing what he's prepared, which is really coming from a reservoir of years and years and years of missionary care and experience, I want to go through a few things here. Number one, your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. So you can listen in through your computer speakers or you can call in on the telephone. Now, a part of what we do during webinars, we want you to interact with the presenter, and we do that the last 15 or 20 minutes of the webinar. And so as questions come to mind today, as Jeff shares, please type them into the question and answer panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll be addressing or asking Jeff those questions again the last bit of our time together. So over 200 people have registered for today's live webinar, which I think is evidence that God's people are digging deeper into his mission right now, and I think that's incredibly encouraging. So in just a minute here, Jeff, I'm going to hand over the controls to you, and I want to thank you again so much for taking time to share with us today. So Jeff, the controls belong to you.
All right, thank you, brother. Well, welcome to this 1615 webinar, and I'm blessed that you're tuning in. And wow, what a season that we're in right now. Really, we are in uncharted territory for a lot of, well, for everybody on the planet, but particularly for a lot of us living here in America. And I'm blessed that you've taken the time to sit down and tune in to what we're doing. And what I'd like to do is just pray real quick, and then we'll get going. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for each and every person that are viewing what we're about to go through. And I pray that you would receive all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So what I want to do is I want to kind of cover the purposes of this webinar. And I'll kind of chart out where we're going, and then we'll just plunge right into it. So first, I want to reinforce our understanding of why missionaries are out there, what the missionary experience entails, and why this pandemic is what I think is a God orchestrated opportunity to augment missionary care. Notice that, augment missionary care. And I'm going to kind of go through that section, doing those three things fairly quickly in the first 10 to 15 minutes, because I'm assuming that the bulk of you that are tuning in right now already have a heart for the nations that you've gotten, obviously, from our missionary God. And so I don't want to lay too much of a foundation that's already there, but I do want to hit the basics. Secondly, the purpose is I want to kind of explain the framework of oversight and care that most missionaries navigate within, and what that could look like in the midst of this pandemic. And then finally, I want to, and this will maybe take the bulk of the time, I want to provide some practical examples of how to care for those who stay, sort of three categories: those who stay, those who have returned, and those whose first time departure for the field, to relocate to the field, is now delayed. And so those are the purposes. And with that, let's kind of plunge right in here. So again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you can't hear this stuff enough. And as a big baseball fan, spring training was cut short. And actually the baseball season that I so look forward to has been obviously put on hold. But hey, spring training every year, professional baseball players who get paid millions of dollars and are the best players of this game in the world, they go to spring training every year to refocus on the fundamentals. So here's a couple of things to keep in mind about the missionaries that are out there. Why are they out there? Well, number one, the missionaries are out there because they have strong convictions about the reality that our God is the missionary God, and that he is seeking worshipers. The Bible is God's self-revelation. What we discover in the Bible from cover to cover is the reality that this God who created and has given us the story of his interaction with creation, when his first two people created in his image rebelled against him, he took the initiative to seek and to save that which is lost. And because our God is the missionary God, when Jesus says to the woman at the well in John 4:23, as she's asking him questions about where's the right place to worship, he talks about the idea of worshiping God in spirit and in truth. And then he makes this point that the Father is seeking worshipers. So missionaries are out there because the Father is still seeking worshipers. Now, secondly, they're out there because not only does God seek worshipers, but he's created humanity in different ethno-linguistic groups. And it's very interesting, Psalm 86:9, Acts 17, the idea that the God who's revealed himself in the Bible, his design prior to creation was to create humanity with different languages, different ethnicities, and the cultures that produces. And then his passion was that he would have worshipers from every people, tribe, nation, and tongue that he himself has created. So missionaries are out there because God is also the creator of the ethno-linguistic groups that he seeks worshipers from. Third, as you know, when Jesus came and he created the new vehicle to represent God on this planet, Israel had been his previous vehicle primarily, well, only. And now Jesus comes and he creates this new entity, this new vehicle to represent God's interests and to be an expression of what his kingdom really is. And at the end of his ministry, we just celebrated Resurrection Sunday last week. Jesus gave what we call the Great Commission, and he commanded his church to go and make disciples from among all those different ethno-linguistic groups that he himself created. And what's interesting about that, and what's relevant about that, especially during this time, is that the command was for them to go, specifically the ones that he's called to go, and to make those disciples where those people live. And so there is a necessity, in a sense, for those that are called to actually go and detach themselves. And that's going to be relevant here in a couple of minutes. And then finally, missionaries are out there because even though God has revealed his end game, there's a guaranteed end game that missionaries are participating in, that he will at a future point in time receive worship from every people, tribe, nation, and tongue. Revelation 5, Revelation 7, you see them there on the board. Even though that's its guaranteed end game, it's not complete yet. There are still unengaged, unreached, ethno-linguistic, distinct groups of people that have never heard the gospel. And so missionaries go, and the missionaries are out there for those reasons. So again, I'm probably preaching to the choir there, but again, I don't think you can hit these foundations enough, because they sort of frame everything else that we do. And really, it's going to frame what I'm about to share with you in the rest of this webinar. All right, so let's see. Let me get to the next slide. Why isn't this turning? All right, so now, what does the missionary experience entail? And again, I'm assuming that if you're tuning in, you have somewhat of an idea of what the missionary experience entails, or you were a former missionary like I was. My wife and I spent 5.5 years serving in the Central Philippines. But it's important, especially during this season, to think about what the missionary experience, what comprises the missionary experience. So let me kind of walk through these, and I'm going to say some provocative things intentionally, because I think I'm going to say some provocative things based on these things in a few minutes, but I think it's necessary to kind of maybe move us further into the direction of the importance of caring for missionaries, especially during a pandemic, but the reciprocal effect of missionaries for the church back here. So first and foremost, the missionary experience entails a conviction that Jesus is worthy to be known for who he is and proclaimed for who he is and obeyed. So there's no missionary that's on the field that does not have a strong conviction or core belief that Jesus is worthy to be known, that our God is worthy to be known for who he is, to be proclaimed, and to be obeyed when he calls you to go. Secondly, and this is, wow, this is an important thing, and this is maybe the first and largest mountain that most people that have that conviction to go, they get the confirmation to go, this is the first mountain that they encounter. The missionary experience entails a plunge into God's financial provision through other people, okay? That transition, if you've been born and raised in America in this hyper-individualistic, hyper-independent culture, where independence is a virtue, where you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, where you're a self-made man, you're the captain of your own destiny, you do whatever you want to do, however you want to do it, and you make it work for yourself. When a person is called into global missions and they need to be sent, and there are finances necessary for that to happen, that plunge into God's financial provision through others is a huge mountain that hits them right in the face at the beginning. Being independent financially, again, is a virtue. Dependence, depending on other people to do and to be what God's called you to do and be, to be dependent on other people for that, that's a huge obstacle that most missionaries have to overcome. But those that are out there have done that, and now they're convinced, and they know by experience, and again, this is relevant for the season we're in right now with where things are at economically in our country and around the world. The idea that financial independence is the greatest virtue, that's sort of being put aside. And what we're learning is, hey, even financial dependence and interdependence in many ways reflects the glory of God in a way that financial independence does not. So missionaries have plunged into the reality of being totally dependent on God's provision through others. And what it took for them to do that is going to be something that, again, gives them something in their personal life inventory that actually, in that reciprocity that I'm going to get to in a minute, could be a real blessing to those of us back here during this season. Now, here's another key one. The missionary experience entails a physical detachment and disconnection from everything familiar. In other words, when you accept the call to go, you willingly, you voluntarily yeah, socially distance, you might say, yourself from the people who know you, who love you, from your family, from your friends. And it's not just a chosen detachment, it's not just a chosen social distancing, you might say, from people. It's a detachment and disconnection from everything familiar. And that's everything familiar, from being able to read street signs, watch things on the television, turn on the radio, understand what's being said. There's a willingness to physically detach and disconnect from everything familiar that comprises the missionary experience. And then, of course, once the missionary lands on the ground over there, there's an immersion into a life context that is foreign in almost every facet. Everything is new. Nothing is routine. The rhythms of life have been thrown off. All of the things that made you feel good about yourself, familiarity and the comfortability that comes with familiarity and rhythm and routines, the missionary, when they land on the field, they're immersed into a life context that is foreign in almost every facet. So again, I'm assuming if you're tuning in, you already know this. What I think one of the main points that I'd like to bring across to you today is that that missionary experience and all that it entails, the situation that they're finding themselves in right now too, that they've already been in, but it has new facets to it. They not only have the need to be cared for, but they're in a unique position to help us on this side walk through what we're going through. And I'm going to unpack that more in just a minute. Okay, let's see. Move forward slide. All right, I don't know, my slide's kind of stalled there, I think. Let me see if I can move it forward. There we go.
There it is, Jeff.
All right, so, got it. All right, and so what I want to do here is now unpack that, what I just shared with you a little bit more, why the pandemic actually augments missionary care. And stay with me on this. It's going to be a little maybe cloudy at first, but hopefully I'm going to make it really clear. Why does the pandemic augment missionary care? Well, number one, because the people here are having, for the first time in their lives, a shared experience of what physical detachment feels like. All right. In other words, the fact that we can't meet face to face with our brothers and sisters in Christ or even family members, we have to actually only maintain our level of connectivity with them through virtual means. Now they are experiencing something that the missionaries themselves have already experienced. And so what that does, I believe, if their heart is in tune with the Lord and they get his heart for the nations and the value of missionaries and the importance of missionaries, continuing to obey the call and complete the mission in spite of what's going on with the pandemic, that shared experience of physical detachment, it generates empathy. In other words, I think that now people here are saying, "Hey, wait a minute! What I'm going through, what I'm experiencing, is what the missionaries have gone through. And if it's troubling for me, if it's a challenge for me, if I've been blessed by staying connected virtually, then how much more important must this be for the missionary who's on the other side of the world and lives in this condition constantly? Maybe there's a way that because I now share in a little bit of their experience, that I can be a blessing to them. And so that shared experience of physical detachment generates empathy. And so does the disruption of life rhythm, routine, and access to resources, right? I mean, right now during the lockdown that we're experiencing here in America, the disruption of the rhythm of our lives and sort of the routines that we have. People, made a big deal about toilet paper initially, but the possibility of, hey, I don't have access to the resources that I had at my fingertips all the time. Again, here's another experience that for the first time, people living in America, Christians particularly living in America, are getting a little dose, a little taste of what the normal state of life is for most missionaries out on the field. And for those that have taken that step to stay connected with their church or in home groups or however else they're using technology, the fact that the needs that they have and having those needs met, the needing and receiving of connectedness that they're getting here through technology, again, what that should do is that should prompt them to say, hey, if we can connect here, even though we can't see each other face to face and have a cup of coffee over a table, if I have this need for staying connected and I can receive it through technology, hey, I can do the same thing with missionaries overseas. Because again, their experience is my experience amplified. And so what I've learned, I want to pass on. And again, I think that's the heart of the Lord, that we've been blessed to be a blessing, sort of the top line, bottom line blessing applied to missionary care, you might say. And then finally, under the fourth point, adding giving to existing receiving feeds the emotional and spiritual health of the missionaries. And this is sort of, again, as I said just a few minutes ago, this is one of the key points that I want to bring out. And what I see in this, what I want to do is I just want to read for you 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and use this as sort of the foundation for the point that I want to drive home here. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3, you're all familiar with it. Paul says to the Corinthians, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. So what Paul is describing here is this idea that what God calls us to do as he comforts us in all our affliction, part of the reason he does that is so we can pass on the blessing, so that we can pass on to others what we ourselves have received from the Lord. Now follow my logic here and follow my thinking, because this is pivotal. The idea is that in most cases, when people think of missionaries, and again, having been on the field myself and needing to be dependent financially on God through so many other people, you're in basically, while you're on the field, you're sort of in a constant state of receiving. In other words, the body of Christ back home is constantly trying to find ways to speak into your life, and you're in a mode of receiving. And so, and that's good and that's healthy and so forth. And even this whole webinar, the idea of providing missionary care. But here's providing missionary care through this pandemic. The point that I want to make is that this is a moment, because of all the things that I just shared with you, where the missionary can go from being a receiver to being a giver. Now, let me say that again. This season has put the missionary in the position of being a giver to those back home rather than just a receiver. They're now able to turn around and pass on the things that God has stocked their life inventory with to those back home. They're a source of wisdom. They're a source of knowledge. They're a source of experience. They're a source of people who've been through what we're already going through and have done it successfully. And this really became clear to me a few years ago. In fact, Matthew came and visited me when I was pastoring in Phoenix, and we were working with refugees. And I was working with a couple of refugee churches from two different ethnic groups in Burma that had been resettled into Phoenix. And as I met with the churches and their pastors, and they would continually want me to teach them different things, it became very clear to me, I need to not be the guy in the driver's seat with them all the time. They don't need to be receiving from me. I need to be receiving from them probably more than they from me, because they know how to walk with God in the midst of a context that I cannot relate to at all. When they can sit there and say how good God is and how faithful God is when they've been in jail 3 or 4 times for baptizing people, when they've been dirt poor, when they've suffered at levels that I cannot ever relate to because of their faith, what am I actually going to speak into their lives? when in reality, those refugees are a gift to us here in the States to help us navigate the season that we're now in. And what I think is a crucial point, as I've said, is what's going on right now. The pandemic augments missionary care because it adds the component of not just being receivers to the missionaries, but it adds the component of them being givers. If the church back here and the people who know and love missionaries recognize the things that I've already pointed out, then we can be looking to them. And I'll point that out more in the practical section here in just a minute. So key concept to bring out. And all right, so I think most of you are familiar with this, but I just thought I would lay it out. There is a framework of oversight and care that I think is crucial to understand if you don't have a clear understanding of it. And basically, in my experience, having been on the field, and then, since I got back, basically, 27 years ago, can't believe it's been that long. But in the time I've been back, I've been swimming in the pond of global missions. And basically, there's three models of how somebody gets to the field. There's those folks that are self-sent, where they have the resources, they've heard from God, and they're probably all members of local churches, but however, whatever the circumstances were, they're basically self-sent. Second category, which is more of the realm that we at Shepherd Staff navigate in, is the missionaries that are church direct sent. In other words, they're not using a traditional agency and what it provides, but the church has made the decision that some of their members have gotten a call from God and they want to get behind them and send them directly to the field. And those are the majority of the churches that we work with at Shepherd Staff, providing the admin component, but then teaching the churches how to send and care for their missionaries. And of course, the more traditional model, which has been so successful in so many ways, but has some of its own challenges, is the church agency sent model, where the church and the agency partner together to send the person to the field. Now, key thing to keep in mind, there's strengths and weaknesses in each model. And what happens during a season like this is a crisis reveals what the strengths and weaknesses are in each model. And we don't have time to get into the details of the strengths and weaknesses of each model, but trust me, it's become evident if you're at all navigating in the realm that I am, that there are strengths and weaknesses in each model. No one model has it all figured out or can do all the things necessary. The key thing, and I think this is the foundation for if it is a church agency sent model or a church direct sent model, the key thing to understand is that it's all about relationship, respect, and trust. And when there is relationship between those three entities, the missionary, their home church, and the agency, when there is relationship and there's respect for one another, there will be trust. And then those things together are essential for a unified, coordinated response to the situation that we now find ourselves in. And the last point here on this is that the care that a missionary needs as a receiver, keep in mind, they also have the need to be a giver, and this is a great opportunity. But the care that they need in a crisis like this requires each player to contribute their specialty or their strength. In other words, there are certain things that a church has the wherewithal to do much better than the agency does. And that can have to do with practical things that the missionaries need on the field. It can certainly have to do if the missionaries have returned back. We'll get into that in just a minute, and so forth. So each entity knowing what their specialty is, and then together, each entity offering that unique piece that they contribute, all of it working together for the glory of God. So again, no time to get into the details on that. And now I want to get into the practical expressions of missionary care. Now, what I want to do as we get into this is I want to couch this from the book of Philippians. And if you can write this down, look it up later. If you're interested, I would be happy to send my notes in addition to the what you see on your screen. But basically, I want to sort of frame practical expressions of missionary care within the book of Philippians and what Paul says to the church at Philippi. And basically what he does is he describes 4 characteristics of what I call a missions-minded church. And in chapter 1, verse 3, Paul makes this point. He says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, verse 4, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy, verse 5, because of your participation in the gospel from the first day until now. So Paul is telling the church at Philippi that they have been partners and participants in what God's doing with him and through him and getting the gospel to the nations. And so there are 4 areas. There are the practical needs that the church of Philippi met from the first day Paul arrived there, where he was housed by Lydia. And when they were sent on their way, culturally that Lydia would have sent them with food and other provisions for their journey to the next town that God was calling them to. So the first area is the practical needs. The second area is prayer, and that comes from chapter 1, verse 19. The third area is the idea of connecting people with proven gifts to encourage missionaries. That comes from chapter 2, verse 25, speaking of Epaphras. And then finally, of course, finances. So I want to couch what I'm about to cover with you from those areas. It's sort of under that umbrella, okay? So here's some practical expressions of missionary care for those still on the field. Number 1, if you're listening, increase your personal prayer for them, their neighbors. Yes, pray for their neighbors that they're living in the midst of. Pray for their U.S. family that are back here, maybe a little disturbed that they didn't return, that they're still on the field. And of course, pray for the country that they're living in. So increase your personal prayer. Secondly, you can create a group of church members to join you. This is a great time. People have a lot of time on their hands. You can start to connect with people through the different means of technology that we have and create a group of church members to join you. Then you want to connect and inform the missionary of what you've done, okay? So kind of do these things without telling them up front. Just start doing it yourself, create the group, and then you're going to be a real blessing to them when you connect with them and you inform them of what you've already initiated. And as you do that, you want to ask them for prayer requests, and you've just told them that you've taken the initiative to corral some people and create a special prayer group for them. When they hear that, they're going to be blessed. So ask them for prayer requests. And then what you want to do, and this is crucial, okay, think of, again, the idea of reciprocity, that missionaries are not just receivers, but they're givers. In that conversation, in that communication with them, share a few personal and ministry prayer requests that they can pray for. Yes, bring them into what is going on in your life and in ministry that you're a part of, and ask them to pray for you. That's a crucial component of really caring for missionaries. Now, for those, so then you can also, this is sort of part 2 of that last slide, establish a routine audio or video call at least once a week. And again, you guys probably half of you are already doing this, but establish a routine audio or video call at least once a week. Set aside at least 45 minutes for the call. In all the time that I spend with missionaries directly talking to them on the field and with their home churches back here, you can't do this in like a 20-minute call. So set aside at least a 45-minute block of time. And then when you connect with them and you have that discussion with them on the phone, here's what you want to do. You want to ask them to describe their personal community and country situation. You want to ask them how they're doing spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, okay? You want to ask them how the communication with their stateside family is going. You want to also ask them, and this is a crucial thing, lifting their eyes up in the midst of the situation they find themselves in, as we need to hear what aspects of God's character has been most comforting to them, and then what biblical truth has been reinforced or amplified in this season. Okay, again, we'll have this slideshow available to you afterwards. And then what you want to do is tell them, you're asking them those things, you're telling them what's your personal family experience, what it's been like in this season, what your church or the members of the church have been doing in the midst, and what scriptural truths God's reinforced to you in this season. Now, here's a thing that maybe you've already done. If you haven't, this is, again, this pandemic and the lockdown has sort of leveled the playing field. Invite them to participate in a recently created virtual gathering. In other words, you could even take the initiative to create a special, you might say, home fellowship or small group with the intention of having the missionary be part of it, and then invite them to be part of an existing or a specially created virtual gathering for them. And then here's a great example of what one of the churches we serve did for their folks, because they knew they were in lockdown even tighter in their country than we are here. They blessed them with an Amazon electronic gift card. So there's a very practical thing. Hey, we know you got some extra time for reading. Here's an Amazon gift card so you can download some books during this season. You could also bless them with a subscription to one of the streaming services. If they have access to the internet there and it's a fast enough streaming, hey, why not bless them during the season with some things that can help sort of, distract them from some of the challenges that they're in the midst of right now. So practical expressions of missionary care for those who will return or have returned. Well, if they haven't arrived back yet, why not book a vacation rental for their 14 days that they're probably going to need to be quarantined? And even if they have, why not do this anyway and bless them in that way? One of the challenges that's happened with the missionaries that have returned is they need to be quarantined, but they're moving in with family members because it's such short notice. And it's very awkward, very difficult, could be even dangerous, you might say, if they try to quarantine for 14 days with family members. If it's with their mother or father or people that have underlying problems, that can create a real problem. And there's a lot of empty Airbnbs and vacation rentals by owner places that are open right now, and that would be an incredible blessing to rent one of those for them. Some of the churches have actually done this. Wherever they land, if they haven't gotten back yet, you want to stock their landing location with groceries that are based on their preferences. Again, I remember people with great intentions wanting to bless us when we'd return back to the States on furlough and so forth, but they never asked us what our preferences were. And so what you want to do is ask them the preferences and then stock wherever they're going to land with groceries based on their preferences. And then if they're already here, you can bless them with gift cards to help with groceries, with clothing, with transportation or entertainment, and so forth. So again, just be creative and God will give you creativity. Now, here's some practical expressions of missionary care for stayers or returners. And this is where it kind of bridges into one of that key point that I was making earlier, where this is an incredible season for a missionary to go primarily from a receiver into a giver, and a reciprocity, a full circleness, you might say, between them and the folks back here that know and love them, and particularly in their home church. So have the leader or member of a recently created virtual gathering invite them to join. Okay. So in other words, if you had small groups or home groups prior to this, men's or women's or youth groups or whatever, and now you've had to convert it into a virtual meeting, have the leader or member that's created that virtual gathering for the people in your church, have them invite the missionary. And keep in mind that, again, missionaries are usually much more flexible than we are back here. So even though the time difference is going to be significant, they may have to get up at 5 in the morning. They may need to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning to participate in whatever this group is. Missionaries are used to sort of living outside the normal routines, and I think they would respond, and they have responded very, very well to that. Now, here's an incredible opportunity here to create a new virtual gathering, sort of like a News from the Nations group, and then connect to your missionary and have them tell the story of what life is like both before and since the pandemic began, and then ask them to actually share with the group some of the things that they've learned, having lived in somewhat similar situation for years over there. Tell them, hey, we want you to pass on to this gathering, and potentially even to a larger gathering within our church, these things. So again, a lot of information to put forth in a short amount of time, but those are some practical things that you can do to express missionary care. So it's a unique season that presents unique opportunities. To me, having the right perspective is essential. Sending and caring for missionaries, as Matt said when we started, in a manner worthy of God is more important than ever. When you do that, it makes you a participant or partner in fulfilling his end game. And there's one last point that I think is very significant if you've never seen this before, but in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 15 to 18, Paul talks about two guys from the church of Corinth that visited him. And basically what he says is Stephanus and Fortunatus encouraged him. They were a source of encouragement to the church that sent them to him. And then he basically says, hey, these kind of people that encourage missionaries should be recognized by the church. They're worthy to be recognized by the church. And whether you get recognized or not, it's irrelevant, but God has called each and every member of a local church here to participate in some hands-on practical way in seeing his name among the nations. And this is an incredible opportunity to do that. Now, one last slide here. I'm going to give you some resources. In fact, this is a great resource, returningwell.com. It's kind of produced by a woman named Melissa Chaplin, who wrote a very good book on returning well, sort of a book on reentry. And just this morning, they actually made public a new book on debriefing, how to debrief a missionary, a mini book on debriefing missionaries that have been affected by COVID-19. There's some other resources there, some websites, and again, we can send this information to you later. But there's also some really good training at the YouTube site down there on the bottom for helping people that need to walk through some serious decision making. So with that, I'm going to shut it down. Again, much more to be said on this big subject, but let's open it up to Q&A, Matt.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much. I love the practical nature of what you shared, but just how it's rooted in Scripture. This is your opportunity, let me remind you, to enter into this dialogue with Jeff. And so in your question and answer panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, go ahead and type your questions in, and I will be shooting them to Jeff over the next several minutes. So much of this seems to emphasize churches and individuals. Jeff, what advice do you have? This is really good for agency leaders seeking to care for their missionaries in this time.
Well, the advice that I have for agency leaders, because again, all of the agencies that I interact with and know, they all really value the role of the local church. And most agency leaders already have specific areas of ministry that they're assigned to. So in a sense, adding a lot of this stuff on doing these things themselves onto their own plate is would maybe create overload. So my challenge is for agency leaders to if you're in a position of leadership, find out, again, rethink what your agency brings to the table. That's just a piece of the overall pie that the missionary you're helping to stay on the field. Find out where your agency is strong and concentrate on that, and then use the connections that you have with the churches of the missionaries that you serve to equip and encourage and empower them to be in the role that God's called them to play. And again, there's a lot of variety, and a lot of moving parts, but I think that is what I would say to an agency leader. And most agency people that I know that are leaders, they're they're busy. And so to add more to their load, they again, I think it's a aha moment both for churches and agencies to go back to, and well, not to go back to, but to take advantage of, obviously, the idea of the role of the local church and the specialty that the agency brings to the table. So
that's good. So Lucy asks, how should a home church care for, this kind of keys off what you just said, Jeff, but how should a home church care for missionaries who are agency sent in a way that does not add burden to the missionaries?
Yeah, I think most of the, most of the care that a church is going to express to a missionary is not going to be in competition or undermine what the agencies do. I think the agency is going to be blessed by the level of engagement that your church has, and the way they're expressing their love. And if the I guess one of the key ways to not upset the apple cart is for the members of the home church or the church that wants to bless the missionary to be in communication with the missionary about what they want to do and how they're going to do it, and then also to keep the agency apprised of what they're doing. And again, I don't the agency folks that I know, and I know a lot of them, if they hear what a church is doing, they're going to be encouraged. They're going to be blessed because they navigate with an understanding of the importance of the role of the local church. So I guess information is the key, and really don't worry about how if it's gonna upset the apple cart. Make sure the connection is good with the missionary and you're keeping them and their agency informed, and it can be a beautiful a deepening of the partnership.
Great. So Steve asks a great question here. How do you help missionaries still in the field combat feelings of uselessness during lockdown when they have a lack of connection with those they're trying to reach?
Well, there's two things. Number one, you need to be able to speak into their lives and show them that their feeling of usefulness doesn't match reality. That the fact that they're still there and they're present, speaks volumes to the people that they've been engaging with on their prior to the pandemic. And keep in mind, this is another interesting facet that you learn when you're out there by experience, is that they know the people that your missionaries live among and serve every day. Those people know that they're Americans. They know that they have access to resources, that they don't have. In fact, this whole idea of the stimulus checks that everybody's getting, I mean, what other countries are doing that? So the sort of very privileged position that a lot of American missionaries are in, that's not something that the people the missionary lives among don't know about. So in other words, they know the missionary had the ability to go back to the States during the pandemic, and they didn't. They chose to stay. That's an incredible testimony to them. And so the missionary needs to be encouraged that even though they may not be feeling useful in what they were doing, the tasks that they were doing, being disconnected from those tasks but still being present is an incredible testimony to God's worth and His love for those people and their love for those people. Um, and so yeah, and then piggybacking on what I said earlier, is that usefulness, if that is what they're feeling and they're still wrestling with it on the field side, what we can do on this side is help them to be useful. How? Tell them, hey, think through how to communicate with us the things that you've learned about the situation that we now find ourselves in. You're
Mm,
experts, we're now learners. Help us to learn how to navigate what you're already used to.
mm. That's really great. You know, Jeff, a friend of mine was serving as a church planner in West Africa in a Muslim country, and their house got broken into several times. There was some violence, and they stayed. And they said after that physical violence, it was a turning point because everyone in the community said, "Why are you still here?"
Mm-hmm.
The gospel doors opened up because of their presence, as you mentioned. I think that's a really great insight. They could have come home during the pandemic, but there they are ministering among those they love. So great
Yeah,
stuff.
and
This is a great question.
yeah,
Go ahead, Jeff.
let me piggyback one more thing on that.
Yeah.
And again, this when you look at Acts 16, I mean this hit me a couple of weeks ago. Paul, when Paul and Silas are arrested in Philippi, he didn't play his Roman citizenship card
Mm,
prior to being arrested. He willfully chose to not reveal he's a Roman citizen. He accepted a beating and imprisonment. He accepted things that we would have avoided at all costs, because at a future point in time, by accepting that, by staying, by not avoiding some suffering, it actually put him in the position to show grace to people that didn't deserve grace.
powerful. So two questions here related. Um, John asks, are there guidelines for virtual small groups when their missionaries are serving in closed countries? That's part A. And then, should workers in closed countries come back or should they stay? So what are guidelines for workers in closed countries right now if you're meeting virtually, Jeff? And what are your thoughts on should they come home?
Well, for those that have stayed on the field, and you want to do a small group with them in closed countries, again, you can keep the conversation. And again, you'd want to brief everybody that's part of it on what the parameters are, for what words can be said and so forth. But it's possible to bless a missionary by letting them just talk about their experience on the field in non-spiritual terminology, non-biblical terminology. So, sort of finding out from the missionary, again, putting them in the position of a giver. Hey, tell us the parameters that you want us to navigate by as you join this online small group. And then the missionary will be able to tell you that. And then you can actually get an incredible window and insight into what's going on with them even if they don't use spiritual biblical terminology. And whether they should stay or go, if they're in a closed country, I think there's so many variables. It really depends on the country, and there's all kinds of that YouTube I referenced earlier will kind of give you some tools on how to assess the risk of staying. But I'm sort of the opinion that even in those high risk countries, continued presence there, understanding the costs could be great. Continued presence there just speaks volumes about the worthiness of our God to be known by those people and to be obeyed by his mission, by those that he's called to go. And I just think, yeah, continued presence just adds another layer of credibility to the reality of who God our God is.
And Jeff, something you surfaced right now with the most traditional model, which is church agency working together to send missionaries. If there are those type of decisions, this is where over communication will benefit you well. Having
Absolutely.
a unified response, as you said, so no one's acting independently. If you do have workers in places where maybe it's untenable because the police state that they're in. I've heard of some situations like that. So wisdom is calling them home, if you will. Well, those agencies and churches and missionaries are talking through those things together. So this is a tough one, Jeff, but I think you'll have some insights for it. What about the people who have been quickly pulled off? Maybe they were in one of those police states that I was mentioned, and they did not have a chance for closure or goodbyes, and it's uncertain whether they can return. How do you encourage and love on those folks?
Well, one of the things that I actually participated in a couple of weeks ago was just for those kind of people. And again, a lot of what's being produced, even that thing that I referenced earlier on returning well that was just produced this morning, will help you with that. Where if you've got a missionary that's in that situation, the key thing about encouraging missionaries is the opportunity to tell their story, the opportunity to process what they've experienced. And so when we do that, what we want to do is we want to ask them the right questions. We want to be good listeners and all of those basic tools for debriefing people. But yeah, when they've left abruptly and now they're back in the States now, and they don't know if they're going to be able to go back, that's a traumatic experience. There's a loss that they've experienced that produces grieving. And so being able to talk it through and having people equipped to help people talk it through is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to a missionary that's had to return abruptly because of the pandemic and that they're not sure how long they're going to be here. The key thing is that relational tether and building some level of trust with them through that relational tether, and then being a good listener, just giving them the opportunity to process. That anybody can do that, but not everybody's willing to just be a good questioner and a good listener. But there are resources available specifically for this moment on how to minister to that specific group of people. And the thing I sat in a couple of weeks ago was about 8 families that came back abruptly, and it was basically an hour and a half of each family sort of telling their story, and that is very, you might say, therapeutic and encouraging.
That's great. So there are so many questions here, folks. I'm not going to be able to address all of them, as you can imagine. I want to let folks know that this exact webinar is going to be repeated at, is it 1:30, Jeff? Yes, 1:30 Mountain, 1:30 to 2:30. So if you didn't get all the webinar, you're listening now, we will repeat this exact same webinar from 1:30 to 2:30. And I'll be sending off these questions to Jeff at the conclusion of today as well. But I have one more question for Jeff, and then I'm going to wrap it up here.
Okay.
Since this relates to this idea you surfaced that missionaries can be givers at this point, I really like this question. Marilyn asks, since some missionaries have much more time now, is it legitimate for church leaders to ask them help with designing their missions preparation programs or missionary care programs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, missionaries would do backflips for that. To be asked that, to be able to be a contributor. Yeah, absolutely, Marilyn. That's and a person on a missions committee or just somebody that knows and loves a missionary, and you're in any position of influence within your church to shape and mold how the church prepares for missionaries. Absolutely, come up with some. Talk to the people that are actually running it. If it's not you, come up with some questions and then just shoot it over there, or talk to them and pick their brains, because they would, yeah, like I said, I don't know any missionaries that would balk at the opportunity to speak into the training program that would prepare people that may actually come alongside them at some point in the future.
That's beautiful. You know, Jeff, you and I have talked about Third John a lot, and it's this incredible story of just elevating the importance of missionary care as high as it can possibly be elevated when John says, send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God's name. And I heard someone teach that passage once, and they started off by asking the question, what makes a godly old man happy? And you know, John opens up with just rejoicing because of the care that Gaius had given to these itinerant missionaries. And I would just say today, you know, not only does it make a godly old saint happy, it makes God happy. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Jeff, thank you for your insights, your experience, and your wisdom. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available for viewing within a week. And if you've not yet registered for Keeping the Missions Flame Burning During a Pandemic, please visit 1615.org and you can register for that one. Again, we're going to talk specifically of how you fan that missions flame to burn even hotter during this time. And Jeff, even some of your insights today, I think, related to that. This is Matthew Ellison for 1615. I want to thank you, Jeff, again for your time, your wisdom, and thanks for everyone for being on the call today. God bless.